My dad had one of his cop friends lock me up, so my brother Paul could pretend to be me. After that, I cut them all off for good. Now, 2 years later, they're desperate for me to stop exposing what really happened. Growing up, I wanted nothing more than to be just like my older brother Paul, a true chess warrior. In our family, intelligence was valued above everything else. I still remember a time when my mom caught me running around the backyard. I told her I was trying to get faster so I could improve at soccer for our school games. She just stared at me and said, "If you ever come home with bad grades because you wasted time on sports, your father and I will be extremely disappointed." That was something she always repeated. Paul, on the other hand, was the golden boy when it came to brainpower. He could pull straight A's without even trying, and at every parent-teacher conference, the teachers would rave about how gifted he was. When he started playing chess, my parents adored him even more. To them, chess was mental nourishment, the only sport they respected. From the time I could understand the world around me, I wanted to be just like Paul. Almost every night, I would sneak into the living room to practice chess alone. Truthfully, I didn't even love it. I was just chasing this fantasy, an image of my parents finally acknowledging me, surrounding me with love, and maybe even Paul choosing to be my friend. But for years, it didn't happen. "We don't have time to drive you both to chess lessons," my mom would always say when I asked to join. So, I taught myself. I watched YouTube tutorials, borrowed every chess book I could from the school library, and studied the game obsessively. I was determined to earn their approval. After years of secretly becoming really good at chess while keeping up a 3.8 GPA, my moment finally came. My so-called claim to fame. "I've kind of fallen out of love with chess," Paul said casually at the dinner table one night. It sounded like he was talking about the weather, but to me, it felt like an earthquake. My mom looked devastated. "But honey, we've all worked so hard for this," she said, nearly in tears. My dad couldn't even respond. Paul just kept his eyes on his plate, poking at his peas with a fork. My adrenaline kicked in. I jumped back into playing on chess.com, obsessively. I played all day, all night, while pooping, showering, riding the bus, everything. In just 2 weeks, I reached a rating of 2,100. I still remember how it felt to screenshot it and send it to my parents. Normally, they ignored my texts, but this time, they replied instantly. "Wow," my mom texted back, followed by heart emojis. My dad sent a thumbs up, basically the fatherly version of throwing a celebration. They suddenly started caring about my day, listening to me at dinner. My mom even hugged me for the first time since I was a little kid. Their love felt like a drug. I couldn't get enough. But there was one person who wasn't happy for me, Paul. It wasn't until I joined the school chess team and started winning real competitions that he finally said something. We were all sitting in the living room when it happened. "Guys, I kinda miss chess, to be honest," Paul said. To a stranger, it might have sounded like a simple sentence. But I knew better. I could feel my heart shattering inside my chest. "Really?" My mom turned toward him, a hopeful sparkle in her eyes. My dad stood up, clapped Paul on the back, and gripped his hand. "I'll start training you again right now. I knew you'd come back to it, son." "Are you still coming to my competition?" I asked, barely getting the words out. "Not everything is about you," my dad snapped instantly, cutting me off. I quickly wiped the tears that had filled my eyes. It was 3 a.m. and I had been sound asleep when Paul unlocked my door from the outside and threw it open with a bang. He began tearing my room apart, pulling everything out of drawers, yanking clothes off hangers. He was already halfway through the chaos when I finally snapped out of my sleep and realized what was happening. "What the actual F are you doing?" I demanded. "I need your chess gear," he said, his voice shaky with desperation. And when I looked into his eyes, I saw something that hit me hard, a flash of recognition. It was the same look I used to have whenever I was chasing our parents' approval. I stood still. That was the moment it finally clicked. None of this was really his fault. We had both been craving the same thing all along, our parents' love, their validation. That same day, while the entire house sat in silence because they were out helping Paul prepare for his grand return to chess, I made a decision. I was done. Done with feeling worthless over some stupid board game. Done with measuring my worth in moves and ratings. So I gathered everything in the house that was even remotely related to chess, even the trophies and medals we had earned. I shoved it all into a big plastic bag, drove deep into the woods, and set it on fire. LOL. The feeling that washed over me couldn't have been bought with years of therapy. It was freedom. But of course, when my parents came home, they didn't exactly see it that way. I thought they'd yell, maybe ground me, maybe even try to guilt trip me. But no, those lunatics called the police. My mom's hand trembled as she dialed the number, her voice shaking as she reported a disturbing incident involving her unstable child, destroying valuable property and setting fires. My dad stood beside her, grim-faced, chiming in occasionally with exaggerated details that made everything sound 10 times worse than it was. Paul watched from the staircase. His expression was unreadable. Maybe shock, maybe something else. Maybe satisfaction? And just when I thought they couldn't possibly go any further, they had me arrested. I wasn't ready for what came next. The living room was thick with silence, broken only by the ticking of the clock. My mother kept pacing, shooting glances out the window. My dad sat stiffly in his armchair, avoiding eye contact. Paul had gone back upstairs after whispering something to them that I couldn't hear. The whole house felt like it was holding its breath, full of tension, fear, and silent blame. The officers arrived about 20 minutes later. Their patrol car rolled up with lights flashing, but no siren, attracting the attention of a few curious neighbors who happened to be outside. The taller officer had close-cropped gray hair and cold blue eyes that scanned me with immediate suspicion. His hand hovered near his holster, just casually enough to be threatening. This was Officer Brennan. The other officer, Officer Martinez, was younger. He had kind, tired eyes and a constant crease between his brows, like he was always trying to solve a complicated puzzle. As soon as Martinez asked what had happened, my mom launched into a performance worthy of an award. She started sobbing dramatically, claiming I'd been acting out for months, destroying things around the house, burning property in the woods out of jealousy toward Paul. Her mascara ran in streaks down her cheeks as she described my supposed spiral into instability. According to her, I had become withdrawn, secretive, and dangerous. A child they had long feared was on the edge. She clutched a tissue tightly to her face, her shoulders trembling with what looked like genuine distress. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This version of the story was so warped, so far removed from reality, that for a moment I almost laughed in disbelief. All those months I'd dedicated to chess, the tournaments I'd won, the progress I'd made with my parents, were now being twisted into a narrative of unhealthy obsession. The burning of my own chess gear, which had felt like an act of personal freedom, was now being portrayed as a dangerous, jealousy-fueled destruction of family property. When I tried to explain that I had only burned my own things, my dad cut me off mid-sentence. He claimed I'd developed an obsession with fire and produced crumpled pages from my private notebook. But these pages had been tampered with. Among my regular entries, notes on chess strategies, tournament schedules, personal reflections, were disturbing scribbles I had never written. Dark thoughts, violent imagery, sinister lines about Paul. He unfolded the papers slowly, like they were proof of something deeply troubling. I stared at them in disbelief, my voice rising in panic. "That's not mine. I didn't write that. Someone added those parts." But my protests only seemed to reinforce their story, that I was unraveling. My mother exchanged a silent glance with my father, who shook his head with a deep, theatrical sadness, as if to say, "This is exactly what we feared." Officer Brennan took the papers, his brow furrowed in concern. That's when I noticed it, the way he and my father exchanged a subtle, knowing look. A flash of recognition passed between them. Brennan tilted his head and said, "Mark? Mark Johnson?" His cold expression softened slightly. "Didn't recognize you at first." And just like that, the mood shifted. They started reminiscing. Turns out they'd played on the same high school baseball team. "Center field, right?" Brennan asked with a half smile. "Man, you could catch anything that came your way." My dad chuckled, clearly forgetting the gravity of the moment. "And you had the best arm on the team." The tension in the room eased, at least between them, as they traded stories about past championship games and old teammates. Their posture relaxed, their tone turned warm, and my stomach dropped. This wasn't a coincidence. My dad had called in a favor. This wasn't a neutral police response. He had specifically requested someone from his past, someone who would take his side. The room tilted slightly in my mind as the weight of that realization hit me. I looked toward Officer Martinez, desperately hoping he'd pick up on the weird dynamic unfolding, but he was too focused on flipping through the altered notebook pages, his face unreadable. Every time I tried to catch his eye, he looked away. When I stepped forward to speak, Officer Brennan immediately moved to block me. His hand rested once again near his holster, a quiet, unmistakable warning. My mother continued her dramatic performance, doubling down on her portrayal of me as unstable, paranoid about Paul, and now apparently destructive and dangerous. She went on to describe how I had always been jealous of Paul's natural talents, how I had grown obsessed with trying to beat him at chess. According to her tearful narrative, the moment Paul decided to return to the game, I had supposedly snapped and started acting out. She even claimed to have found small burnt objects in my room, a total fabrication, and said she had noticed lighters and matches going missing, another flat-out lie. Paul stayed silent in the corner, clearly uncomfortable. He leaned against the wall with his arms folded tightly across his chest, eyes locked on the floor. Every so often, he would glance up and briefly meet my desperate gaze, before looking away again. His silence said it all. He didn't join in on the lies, but he also didn't defend me. When Officer Martinez asked him directly if he had noticed any concerning behavior, Paul just shrugged and muttered something about me being different lately. That's all it took. Officer Brennan suggested a 72-hour psychiatric hold for my own safety, and my parents agreed with almost disturbing eagerness, as if this had been the plan all along. I think that would be best, my father said, the relief in his voice impossible to miss. We've been worried about escalation, about what might come next. My mother nodded in agreement, her head bobbing as she dabbed at her eyes with what remained of her shredded tissue. We just want what's best for our child, she added, her voice breaking at exactly the right moment. My protests only made things worse. This is insane, I shouted, my voice cracking from the pressure. They're lying. I only burned my own chest stuff because I couldn't stand being compared to Paul anymore. But the more I spoke, the worse it looked. Every word only seemed to confirm the picture they had painted. Officer Brennan shared a knowing look with my parents, like my outburst had confirmed everything they warned him about. Officer Martinez finally looked me in the eye, but all I saw there was calm professionalism. He was weighing my words against their story, the words of two tearful, seemingly concerned parents, a pile of doctored notebook pages, and a very vocal, very desperate teenager. They let me pack a small bag under supervision. Officer Martinez stood in my doorway, silently watching as I moved through my wrecked room, collecting basic essentials. He wasn't intimidating, nor was he kind, just present, just doing his job. I moved mechanically, slowly, the weight of what was happening finally starting to sink in. My mom appeared at the door with a toothbrush and toothpaste wrapped in a washcloth. Her eyes were still rimmed red, but she had mostly regained her composure. As she handed them to me, she leaned in close, speaking just loud enough for only me to hear. "This is to help you," she whispered, her fingers lingering on mine. "Sometimes we need other people to step in when we can't see our own problems." The quiet certainty in her voice was, somehow, the most chilling part. She believed it. Every twisted piece of the story they had constructed. She believed it all. Paul never looked me in the eye as they led me out. He stood at the top of the stairs, hands shoved deep into his pockets, watching silently as the officers escorted me through the foyer. For just a second, I thought I saw regret flicker across his face. But it vanished quickly, replaced by the usual blank expression he wore when he didn't want to feel anything. As the front door closed behind us, I caught one last glimpse of my family. My mother was leaning against my father, his arm draped around her shoulders. Paul still stood at the top of the stairs, watching, close enough to see everything, but distant enough to stay removed. I wondered if he felt guilty, or just relieved to have the spotlight back on him. The cool evening air hit my face as the officers led me toward their patrol car. Curtains twitched on either side of the street as neighbors peeked out, watching the quiet, academic family's child being escorted into a squad car. I could already hear the whispers that would ripple through the neighborhood by morning. The ride to the psychiatric facility was silent. Officer Martinez drove while Brennan sat in the passenger seat, occasionally speaking into the radio in low tones. I sat in the back, separated from them by a mesh divider, watching familiar streets pass by through the window. The world outside went on like nothing had happened. People walking their dogs, grabbing snacks from convenience stores, commuting home from work, while my own life had just been completely derailed. I stared at the blur of my neighborhood disappearing behind us. Then I heard Brennan's voice, low, casual, making a call about doing Mark a favor. The engine noise mostly drowned it out, but I caught pieces. Old teammate, family situation, keep it quiet. The way he spoke about my fate like it was just a favor for an old friend, not an official police matter, sent a chill through me. When we arrived, the building looked as unremarkable as any office block. Small windows, a locked entrance, fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow that made everything feel dreamlike, like stepping onto a sterile movie set. A security guard checked us in, and the officers handed over some paperwork to a receptionist, who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. They took anything that could be considered a hazard, my shoelaces, my belt, and a nurse with tired eyes began asking intake questions while checking off boxes. A male attendant led me to a small room where I was told to empty my pockets, remove my hoodie drawstring, my belt, even my shoelaces. Each item was placed into a plastic bag and stored away like evidence. With every piece they took, I felt like they weren't just taking away objects, they were peeling away layers of my identity, stripping me down to something empty and exposed. Then came the questions. The nurse, whose name tag read Nancy, had dark circles under her eyes and chipped pink nail polish. She asked everything in a flat, monotone voice, barely glancing up from her clipboard. When I tried to explain the truth, that my family had manipulated the entire story, that my father had called in a police officer who just happened to be his old high school buddy, she paused, pen hovering, then jotted something down before calmly continuing. I told her it wasn't paranoia if it was real. My dad literally knows the cop. They played baseball together. They were reminiscing and laughing about it right in front of me. Nancy's expression didn't shift. She made another note, then looked up briefly. Do you often feel that people are conspiring against you? Every attempt to explain what had really happened seemed to bury me further in the clinical profile they were creating. Paranoid, delusional, dangerous. They placed me in a sterile room with a bed bolted to the floor and a thick glass window that overlooked the parking lot. The space was small, maybe 10 by 12 feet, with pale blue walls and a coarse gray industrial carpet. The bed had a thin, crinkly mattress wrapped in waterproof material that rustled whenever I moved. A small, doorless bathroom was tucked behind a half wall, offering minimal privacy. A blinking red light in the corner marked the ever-watching eye of the surveillance camera. I sat there, trying to process how, in less than 3 hours, I had gone from burning my own chess pieces to being locked inside a psychiatric facility. The weight of what had happened came in crashing waves. Just that morning, I was a teenager making a symbolic stand for my own independence. Now, I was labeled mentally unstable. My thoughts were being medicalized, my reality written off as fantasy. I lay back on the stiff mattress, staring blankly at the ceiling, trying to untangle the blur of events that had led me here. The next morning, I met Dr. Lowell, after a night of restless, broken sleep interrupted by hourly bed checks. I was escorted to a small office where the psychiatrist waited. He was a thin man in his 50s with thinning gray hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a tweed jacket that looked out of place for the warm season. He didn't stand when I entered, just gestured silently toward the chair across from his desk, eyes still scanning the file in his hands. The manila folder in front of him was already thick, surprisingly thick for someone who'd only been admitted the night before. He flipped through page after page, intake reports, staff notes, and what I could only assume were written statements from my parents. Occasionally, he made a thoughtful, or adjusted his glasses when something caught his attention. I shifted in the hard plastic chair, waiting to be acknowledged. When he finally spoke, it was to reference my parents' concerns, my so-called obsession with chess, and their allegations about fire setting. I leaned forward, trying to explain. It's not like that at all. I wasn't obsessed. Chess was just the only way to be seen in my family. My brother Paul was always the favorite. When he gave up chess and I got good at it, I finally got some attention. Then he wanted back in, and they dropped me all over again. I burned my own stuff to let it go. It was symbolic. But the more I spoke, the more skeptical his expression became. As I poured out years of emotional neglect and conditional love, he was jotting notes on a pad, notes that didn't reflect my words, but his interpretation of them. When I talked about fairness and favoritism, he scribbled narcissistic tendencies. When I brought up my dad's connection to the police officer, he wrote paranoid ideation, echoing the nurse from the intake. When I described how Paul had always been prioritized, how the family dynamic was built around his excellence and my silence, Dr. Lowell noted sibling rivalry and distorted perceptions of familial relationships. By the end of the session, I realized something chilling. I was trapped in a system where every effort to defend my truth only served to confirm their version of events. If I spoke calmly, I was emotionally flat. If I expressed anger or fear, I was unstable. If I insisted I wasn't imagining any of it, then I was locked in a delusion. There was no version of me they would believe. There was no way to win. The system was built to pathologize every response I gave. As our session wrapped up, Dr. Lowell casually mentioned that my 72-hour psychiatric hold could be extended if necessary. He said it like it was an afterthought, closing my file and taking off his glasses to clean them with a soft cloth. Of course, the initial hold is just for assessment, he said calmly. If we determine you need more comprehensive treatment, we can extend your stay. He didn't say if, he said when. The way he framed it made the outcome feel inevitable. A chill ran through me. Afterward, I was taken to the common area, a large, dimly lit room filled with worn-out couches, a wall-mounted TV encased behind scratched plexiglass, and a few tables where patients worked on puzzles or played board games. The harsh fluorescent lights cast a sickly hue over everything, making pale skin look ghost-like and shadows under eyes seem even deeper. Some patients rocked back and forth, mumbling or staring blankly at the walls. Others paced in repetitive loops, tracing invisible lines on the floor. But not everyone seemed unwell. Many just looked normal, teenagers flipping through battered paperback books, young adults scribbling in journals or chatting quietly. A few older patients participated in group activities without much enthusiasm. As I hovered uncertainly near the doorway, unsure of where to go or what I was supposed to do, a skinny boy with heavy bags under his eyes approached me. He looked about my age. "New kid," he said, not a question, just a statement. "I'm Drew, been here 2 weeks." He had a jittery energy, always moving, tapping his fingers on his leg, twisting the hem of his shirt. When I told him I thought I'd only be here for 3 days, his bitter laugh said otherwise. "Now that's what they say to get you in the door," he muttered. "But once you're here, all they need is your parents' consent, insurance to keep paying, and a doctor willing to check a few boxes. That 3-day hold turns into however long they want it to." I stared at him, stunned. "Some kids have been here for months," he added, lowering his voice and glancing around to make sure no staff were listening. "The longer you stay, the more they bill. It's a business." When I told him my parents had set me up, I expected confusion or disbelief. But Drew just nodded, completely unfazed. "Rich parents don't like inconvenient kids," he said, like it was obvious. "Happens all the time. They don't want to deal with normal teenage stuff, so they bring you here, tell the doctors whatever they need to hear, and boom, problem solved. Out of sight, out of mind." His tone was disturbingly casual, like he'd said these exact words a dozen times before. Like this was just reality. Before walking away, Drew slipped something into my hand, a small folded piece of paper, passed with practiced ease. His fingers brushed mine briefly. "Not here," he whispered. "Cameras." Then he turned and joined a group working on a half-finished jigsaw puzzle, leaving me standing alone, trying to act natural, trying not to look like someone holding a secret. Later, I locked myself in a bathroom stall, my hands trembling as I carefully unfolded the note. It was short, scrawled in tight handwriting. "You're not crazy. I saw your file. They're lying. Meet me in the TV room at 8. Drew's handwriting was tiny and precise, every inch of the scrap of paper filled with urgent information. "You're not crazy. I work records, seen your file, parents lying, staff knows. Meet TV room, 8 p.m. during shift change. Blind spot from cameras." That night, we met in the TV room, sitting in adjacent chairs in the corner, pretending to watch a rerun of some overproduced cooking show. The evening shift had just swapped in, and the new attendants were still gathering updates at the nurses' station. For a brief window, we were less supervised. "They came in with the whole story already scripted," Drew whispered, eyes locked on the screen. "They said you'd been showing signs for months, claimed you were setting small fires around the house, becoming obsessed with your brother, writing disturbing things." He shook his head slowly. "They even brought in notebook pages. Some of it was your writing, sure, but other parts, different pen, different pressure, someone added to it." Working in the records room as part of his therapy assignment, Drew had seen my intake forms, statements typed before I'd even arrived, and, disturbingly, a letter on my school's letterhead from a counselor I'd never spoken to. "I'm supposed to just alphabetize," he said with a faint grin, "but I read everything." He said my file was already full before I set foot in the facility. "There was a letter claiming you were withdrawn, that you'd shown signs of aggression, but at the bottom, it said you'd never actually met the counselor. Everything was secondhand, based on your parents' reports." When I asked what I could do, Drew didn't hesitate. "You document everything," he said, barely audible. "Which staff are decent, which ones just collect a paycheck, every inconsistency in your treatment, and then you wait for a mistake. You have to play the game," he added. "Take the meds or pretend to. Don't challenge Lowell, just nod and say you're working on your issues." He glanced around before continuing. "Meanwhile, keep records, which nurses actually listen, which doctors spend more than 5 minutes with you, when they change your meds without explaining why. We're building a case." In the following days, I learned the rhythm of the facility. Everything ran like clockwork. Morning meds at 7 a.m., breakfast at 7:30, group therapy at 9, individual sessions scattered throughout the day, lunch at noon, structured activities in the afternoon, dinner at 5:30, evening free time, lights out at 10. The routine was rigid, predictable, monotonous. One day melted into the next. I played along, pretended to take meds, spoke just enough in group therapy. I learned my parents had visited, not me, but Dr. Lowell, bringing evidence of my supposed decline. According to Drew, who found notes from the meeting in my file, they'd brought text messages where I sounded upset, dark short stories from English class, and more claims about my so-called obsession with winning and unhealthy rivalry with Paul. They brought a bunch of stuff, Drew told me during one of our evening check-ins. Old messages, you're writing, stuff no one should take seriously. But they spun it all. After that visit, my dosage was quietly increased. No warning, no behavioral justification. Drew and I documented everything. We created a coded system in a journal I was allowed to keep for therapy. I wrote seemingly innocent daily reflections, but certain phrases recorded key details: who was present during specific incidents, the exact times of med adjustments, what different staff told me. Then, a week in, something unexpected happened. During lunch, a new patient arrived. A girl about my age with dark curls pulled into a messy ponytail. She was escorted by a nurse and sat down at our table, her tray clattering softly as she took her seat. As she glanced at me, her eyes widened. "Hey, I know you," she said, pointing her fork. "You're that chess whiz from Westlake High, right? I saw you wipe the floor with everyone at the regional finals last month." I froze, unsure how to respond. When I asked her about school, she leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Paul's back," she whispered. "He told everyone you had a breakdown, that the pressure got to you." She shook her head slowly, frowning. "It's weird. He's been telling everyone you had some kind of breakdown," Vanessa said, frowning as she pushed food around her plate. "That you couldn't handle the pressure of competitions, so you had to take time away." She shook her head, clearly confused. "But that doesn't make any sense. You always seem so calm at tournaments." Then came the part that made my stomach turn. "Worse, he was wearing your medals," she added. "He's telling everyone he trained you, and now he's making his comeback. I'm not kidding. He showed up with your actual medals." I froze. "I remember that special one with the blue ribbon from the state championship. You were so proud of it. Now he's walking around wearing it like it's his." Her voice dropped as she leaned in. "And people noticed? He's using your exact strategies in online tournaments. In this video, his parents posted some celebration thing. You can literally see one of your notebooks open in the background. Same handwriting. Same diagrams with the little stars you always use to mark critical moves. Paul wasn't just benefiting from my disappearance. He was stealing my identity, my tactics, my stories, my wins." "The chess club's been talking," she added. "People are starting to wonder. He's playing online using the same openings you're known for. It's weird." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the thin, crinkling mattress, staring at the ceiling as the night staff made their hourly checks, the flashlight sweeping briefly into the room like a prison guard's. My chest ached with rage. Paul was free, celebrated, while I was locked in a place that made me question my own mind. He was using my moves, my accolades, my name, and my parents were helping him do it. The injustice of it pressed down on me like a weight I couldn't lift. The next morning, Drew found me at breakfast, practically vibrating with excitement as he slid into the seat next to me. "Got something?" he whispered, eyes gleaming. His knee bounced under the table. Night nurse Jenkins got called away. Some patient freaked out, and she left her computer logged in. I printed emails and stashed them in the ceiling tile of the supply closet. Later that afternoon, during our free period, he retrieved the folded printouts and met me in the bathroom, away from cameras. The emails were typed, professional, and damning. They were between Dr. Lowell and my parents. In one, Dr. Lowell updated them on my resistance to treatment and continued fixation on perceived family injustices. My parents responded with concern about my lack of progress, and one message from my mother stood out in particular. She wrote, "We're concerned about releasing the patient before Paul's important tournament. Given the history of jealousy and acting out, we feel it would be best for everyone if the patient remained under supervision until after the event on the 15th. Is this something we can arrange?" It was undeniable. They wanted me out of the way, locked up, so Paul could take my place, uncontested. Dr. Lowell's reply was just as horrifying. "I share your concerns about premature discharge. Given the patient's fixation on chess and documented sibling rivalry, I agree it would be prudent to maintain the current treatment plan through the date you referenced. We can reassess afterward." There it was, clinical, calculated collusion. But as Drew and I looked at the pages in the harsh bathroom light, we both knew it still wasn't enough. Not yet. "Who's going to believe two unstable teenagers over respected adults?" Drew said as he carefully folded the emails and returned them to their hiding spot. "To everyone else, we're just crazy kids making stuff up. We need something concrete, something they can't ignore." The next day, I tried a new strategy with Dr. Lowell. I stopped defending myself. Instead, I leaned into his narrative, admitting that maybe he was right about my fixation on fairness, my jealousy of Paul's so-called natural talents. I sat across from him, hands folded neatly in my lap, expression appropriately subdued. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," I said, keeping my voice calm, even, just sincere enough. "Maybe you're right about some things. I get caught up in what's fair or unfair. I think it's been hard for me to let that go." When I mentioned burning the chess pieces, I watched his pen start moving. "Showing insight," he wrote. "Burning the chess stuff? It probably wasn't the healthiest way to deal with things," I continued, glancing down as if ashamed. "I was just frustrated, and I can see now how that might have scared my parents." Dr. Lowell nodded with approval, scribbling notes rapidly, documenting my supposed breakthrough. Over the following days, I became the model patient. I participated enthusiastically in group therapy. I opened up about jealousy, about needing attention, about regrets. I apologized for the stress I'd caused my parents. In sessions, I shared carefully planned reflections, volunteered to go first, and thanked others for their insights. During activity time, I helped with art projects, cleaned up after crafts, and even offered support to other patients. The staff started to notice. I received nods of approval, compliments on my attitude. Dr. Lowell was impressed with my progress. The nurses noted my change in demeanor. Even my parents, during a brief monitored phone call, sounded cautiously optimistic. "You sound much better," my mother said. "Dr. Lowell says you're finally acknowledging your issues." My father added, "We're proud of the progress you're making, but we think it's best if you continue treatment just a little longer." Neither of them mentioned Paul, or the upcoming tournament. Behind my compliant facade, Drew and I kept working. We'd identified a staff member who might be sympathetic, a younger nurse named Ellie. She was relatively new, only a few months in, and she still treated us like human beings instead of diagnoses. She actually listened, maintained eye contact, asked thoughtful questions. You could tell she hadn't been worn down by the system yet. Drew kept accessing records when he could, logging medication changes that lined up not with my behavior, but with emails from my parents. I tracked contradictions from staff, discrepancies in my treatment plan, shifting explanations about my discharge. We hid our notes carefully, taped under tables, inside the spines of books, tucked away in Drew's ceiling tile stash. Then we learned something big. In 3 days, I was scheduled to be transferred to a step-down facility, a less secure adolescent center focused on reintegration. My parents didn't know yet. Drew overheard Dr. Lowell and the facility director discussing bed availability and upcoming transfers. My name was on the list for Oakwood Center. It was our chance. Oakwood allowed phone access, fewer restrictions, more freedom. I would no longer be cut off from the world, while Paul paraded around in my name. According to the calendar in the common room, the tournament was still a week away. Paul still had time to show off my moves, wear my medals, and keep telling people he was my mentor. But now I had a chance to stop him. On my last night at the acute facility, Drew gave me something, a phone number, written on a scrap torn from his journal. "My cousin Marcus works with a patient rights group," he said. "He helped me once. He knows how these places operate, how they keep kids longer for insurance, how they medicate first and ask questions later. Call him once you get to Oakwood. He can help." I hugged Drew. It was awkward. Neither of us were big on physical affection, but it was real. In the short time we'd known each other, we'd built a bond rooted in mutual understanding, in being silenced by the same system. I didn't just want to free myself anymore. I wanted to help Drew too. As we pulled apart, Drew gave me a sad smile. "Just don't forget this place once you're out," he said, his usual nervous energy briefly stilled. "People need to know what happens here. How they take normal kids with normal problems and turn them into patients. How they always believe parents over children. How they medicate instead of listen." The next morning, as I packed the few belongings I had for transfer, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. A strange mix of hope and determination. I folded the clothes my mother had sent carefully, tucking Drew's cousin's phone number deep into the hem of a t-shirt, where it wouldn't be found during any last-minute inspections. My small journal, filled with coded entries tracking every twist in my treatment, was hidden between the pages of a bland self-help book I'd been assigned in therapy. I wasn't broken, I wasn't crazy, and I refused to let them erase me. Despite everything, the forced medications, the manipulative therapy sessions, the surveillance, and the relentless attempts to turn normal emotions into symptoms, I still knew who I was. I remembered the truth, and most importantly, I still had a plan. Looking out the window at the white van waiting outside, I knew I wasn't free yet, but I was getting closer. The Oakwood Center logo was printed on the side of the van in blue letters. A driver in scrubs leaned against the door, lazily puffing on a cigarette. It wasn't the heroic getaway vehicle I'd once imagined, but it meant progress, movement, one step closer to regaining control of my life. Once I was out, I would reclaim my story, not just for me, but for Drew, and for every other kid whose truth had been buried under convenient diagnoses and the polished lies of parents. This wasn't about chess anymore, not really, and it wasn't just about Paul or my parents either. It was about a system that gave adults the power to institutionalize children simply for being inconvenient. A system that listened to the parents' version of events without ever questioning the motives. A system that labeled ordinary teenage emotions as disorders because it was easier, more profitable, and more controllable. Paul could keep the medals. He could even keep the chess pieces. But not my identity. And my parents couldn't hide the truth forever. The realization felt sharp and real. Chess had never been the goal. It was just the method, a way to chase love, a language I thought would translate into being seen, being enough. But now I had something more important, more real. As they escorted me out to the van, I felt lighter. The anger was still there, but it had changed shape. It wasn't rage anymore. It was resolve. I wouldn't burn anything else in protest. I wouldn't scream or self-sabotage. That was their narrative. That was what they expected. No. This time, I would expose the truth calmly, carefully, piece by piece. I would document, record, reveal, not with chaos, but with clarity. The van doors shut behind me, and I watched the facility shrink through the rearview mirror. The driver muttered that Oakwood was about 40 minutes away. I nodded, leaning back into the stiff seat, feeling every bump as we turned onto the highway. 40 minutes closer to freedom. 40 minutes closer to justice. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I was already planning my next move, one they wouldn't see coming. Because unlike chess, where every piece is visible and every rule is written, this game had hidden players, changing rules, and shifting boards. But I was learning, fast, and this time, I wouldn't be playing for their approval. I'd be playing for my truth.